is on.
I lost you there.
Yeah,
Okay. Can you hear me now? Everything
I
okay?
can. Yes, yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. So I was asking, what's the thing you miss the most? You were saying normalcy, right?
Just normalcy. Yeah, the ability to, walk into a restaurant, the ability to go to a movie, things like that. Just normal life.
Mm-hmm. And do you remember the last time you went to a theater? The last movie you want to watch before this started?
Oh gosh, what would it have been? It would have been in 2019. And no, I would have to think about what was it. Yeah, so it was 2019. That's quite a long time ago now.
Yeah, I was asking because most people I ask this question to, even if it was, like in February or March, they don't remember the movie. And it happened to me. Chaikin asked me the question, like, you're asking, what was yours? And I was like, shit, I don't remember it. It's like we've passed a different phase of the universe or whatever you're going to call it, or in our lives, and nobody remembers. It's so weird.
Oh, yeah. And at the end of February, I was at, the last convention I was at was C2E2 in Chicago. And we were kind of joking about it. Ha, 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 last convention of the year. And Seattle, Emerald City, was supposed to be 2 weeks after that. And it never happened. And we, as I said, we were joking about it being the last convention of the year. And it was.
Yeah, a lot of people is telling me the same story about C2E2. Like, yeah, we won't see each other in the rest of the year. And half joking, half serious.
Right.
Someone was like, well, maybe we'll be the last one because situation was getting pretty dire, right? Right there.
Yeah. And, we were careful about it. We weren't shaking hands. No one was wearing a mask because at that time they said not to. But it kind of had this pall over it where you could tell that people were aware and being a little more careful. I think the crowd was down. But yeah, it was very sad to know that was the last one.
And do you think they'll be coming back anytime soon?
Not here.
Mm-hmm.
Not here. I don't know about Europe. I know there are an awful lot of things I'm invited to and looking at for next spring. And even that, who knows? I mean, it's just hard to tell.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody the other day saying that I believe that the first one next year is going to be San Diego.
Okay.
Summer next year, because I honestly can see, except if the vaccine is real, and I honestly can't believe we are going to have a vaccine this soon, as they are saying, by the end of the year. But who knows? It's the first time everybody in the world is working on the same vaccine at the same time. So maybe, I don't know. But even with that, I see people is not going to be feeling safe enough, if you know what I mean, to go to conventions in the spring. But San Diego being in the summer, will have, like 6-7 more months for people to have tested the vaccine, if there is one. I think and I don't think San Diego can allow themselves, San Diego or New York Comic Con for that matter, to allow themselves to not have 2 years in a row.
No, but if they do, I would expect there would have to be more spacing and a reduced crowd. Yeah. And the question would be, how would you really manage it? And because even if there is a vaccine by the end of this year, not everybody is probably going to be able to get it by July of next year. So then do you have, between fans and professionals, for example, a facilitator who will take their book and then hand it to me to sign, and I think we might be able to have conventions, but I don't think they'll be the same. And there's going to have to be some method of ensuring safety for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's got to be, as you said, a facilitator, more distances. Knowing San Diego, I was thinking that maybe what they will do is to do most of the convention outside of the convention center.
That could be, yes.
Because they've been extending, in the last few years, as you know. I remember the last years where everything was in, that you couldn't move an inch. Right. But then so they decided to start doing, activations and all that stuff out of the convention. So even I don't know if baseball is played during at the same time the convention is, but maybe they could use the Padres stadium and extend everything through the bay, so it's outside. Doing more like I don't know if you've been in Luca or Angulem, but more like the Luca or Angulem are mostly on the street.
Yes, Yeah, and I think there are ways where they could conceivably do something like that. And but it still comes down to some method of spacing.
Yeah.
And the question is, what exhibitors are there versus which ones aren't? How wide do the aisles have to be? Do you have to double the width of the aisles and put a yellow line down the middle? So if you're going one direction, you stay on this side, the other direction, that side. But clearly, I think even next year, for this to work, there will have to be a lot of accommodations made.
Yeah. Has this meant a big change in your workload because of the pandemic? Did you have to slow down, or everything has been more or less like as normal for you?
It's been more or less normal. What I'm trying to do now, though, is as we get to the end of 2020, is look at 2021 and say, what is it going to be? Because typically I set aside, like 6 weekends a year in which I do conventions. And depending on how long the convention is, I always know I'm going to be at this particular city, in this particular spot in the world doing conventions. And I know I'm going to do, whatever, 10 sketches at each of those conventions and that kind of thing. So going into 2021, as I'm wrapping up a lot of my workload now in 2020, now I'm really starting to take a look at that and guess, what is it going to be? Do I have more time to do comic work because I'm at home? Do I take on more sketches, whatever it might be? And that's all part of what I'm trying to figure out.
Also, have you noticed that you overwork? Because a lot of people is telling me that, of course, since you're spending more time at home, by the end of the day, they look at the stuff and they're like, oh, I've worked more than I expected. And also the opposite. I've got both cases, the ones who told me that it's very difficult for them to work. It took them at least 1-2 months to go back to a normal pace. And others who tell me by the end of the day, I realize I'm working much more than usual.
Yeah, for me, it's I make sure that I force myself out of my office so that I don't fall into that trap. And a lot of it is because in my younger days, I worked ridiculous hours. I really did. I mean, I just worked all the time. And so now I make sure I force myself out of the office. The thing I find that's hard to adapt to is without conventions, without store appearances, without that sort of excitement of, you walk into even a comic store now, there's so much less product. I commented to a colleague just last week that it's almost like we're producing comics that don't even get printed. And they do. And we know that we do because we end up getting them. But there's such a lack of conversation about comics that it's almost like we're producing these things. And even if they are getting printed, they're getting stored in a warehouse or something because there's just that lack of connection to the marketplace that we have now. And it's like, in some ways, it's almost like being in a prison. And I hate to say that because I know it's not the case, but it's almost like being sequestered, and you produce this product and you end up getting the printed version of the books as the creator, but you never see the books anywhere else, like whether it's in a comic store or at a convention. And there's just, like I said, that lack of conversation and that lack of connection.
Yeah, we're one of the worst parts, I think, about all this, and I'm not talking about the distribution changes at this year or anything else, that's a completely different animal, is the loss, in a way, of the sense of community.
Yes,
I mean,
very much.
Getting together, even as creators or as fans, or creators with fans, just going to the store and finding a fan and chat with him, or chatting with your friend, the retailer who you've known for 20 years, just going to the store, pick up the comics, chat for like a while, going back home, listening to the comments of the fans, right? That sense of community, I think losing that is really important for you guys as creators, right?
It is. And because, as you surely know, we are a global workforce, right? Yeah. So even the few times we all get to meet, it's really important to put a face to the name and just build a connection. If you're over a lunch, dinner, a beer, something like that's what is important to, I think, keeping us together as a creative community. And so all of that is gone right now, and it's hard to maintain through Zoom calls and things like that as we keep on trying to work. And we're also, as a result of all this, seeing a lot of changes in the industry with publishers, as you know. So that becomes another part of it that, for a lot of people, they don't even have that normal sense of security as they go ahead and work in terms of what the future is going to bring.
Yeah. Also, that brings me back to the question I asked you before about, what you miss the most, because many creators are actually telling me that they don't miss the conventions, but what they miss is the getting together part.
Yeah.
We end the workday, the sketching, signing, whatever, panels, blah, blah, blah. You get to a place to go have dinner, you get together, and then the part that I like the most about convention, which is the person you don't expect to see.
Right.
And then you sit down, he's in the same dinner, he or she's in the same dinner, and suddenly you are like 3 hours talking to that person that you didn't expect. That's the part that I love the most about the conventions. That connection, as you said, with the people you expect, yes, but the ones that you don't expect makes it even better, right?
Yeah, it does. But I will also say that I do miss, more than I thought I would have, the conventions themselves and interacting with fans and readers. That, I'm always the person that, as it's getting to be a week before I have to leave for a convention, I look at the amount of work that I have to do before I go, and it's like, oh, how am I going to do it? Why did I say yes to this convention? There's so much to do. And you know how it is that you try and get so much work done before you get on the plane. You get on the plane, you're already burned out. And then you get there, and for some of us, as soon as you get there, you unpack in your hotel room and you're going right back to work, right? And you just say, why did I do this? But I have found that I do miss it. And I miss, again, that connection with colleagues, with other writers, artists, editors, whatever it might be, and fans.
Yeah. Some other people has told me the same thing, that at the same time, they were burned by conventions, as you just said, but suddenly it's like, man, I miss it. I just miss it, because the interaction with the fans is a big part of your life.
Yes.
And if you don't have it, you feel, as you said, you feel in a vacuum. You don't feel secure because you don't know the reaction to the work. You cannot put a face in people. You cannot just spend 5 minutes talking to a guy, talking about whatever panel or whatever story you created 2 months ago or 5 or 20 years ago. That sense of security that you get from the interaction with your fans, it's gone.
Yes. Well, the other part of it is that, as many people I'm sure will tell you, that once you have been in the industry a long time, which I sort of have, I guess, that you get to know the faces and names of these people who will come see you at that city every time you're there.
Yeah.
Or they'll travel from con to con, and you always kind of get to the point where the 15 or 20 people that you will see for sure, right, in any particular show. When I say 15 or 20 people, I mean fans.
Yeah.
And so you find yourself wondering, how are they? How have they done? How have they gotten through this? And you realize that, this guy who might have shown up in front of you 15 years ago with his 5-year-old son kind of progresses to the point where he's still coming, but he doesn't have that son. Or you see guys now bringing grandkids, and so they become very familiar to you as a professional, and so you miss that as well.
Yeah. I guess you started comics when reading comics when you were a kid. Correct me if I'm wrong. And that in a way took you to work in comics later in your life to become a professional. But why comics? I mean, of all the chances you had, animation, storyboarding for movies, etc., why comics? Why did you decide to do comics?
Because, and that one's very easy for me, David. It's because I wanted not just to draw, but I wanted to write. And there was this part of me that said, I want to write stories and I want to draw those stories. And when you get down to it at that point, then comics is the only one medium that truly allows for that. And so even from my first couple of days in the business, I always knew I wanted to be a writer, that I wanted that opportunity to write the stories as well. So it ended up working out very well for me that way. But that's what drew me to comics, where it wasn't that I wanted to be just a writer, nor did I want to be just an artist, that I wanted to do both. And be able to write and draw and create those stories. And that's why I often refer to myself as a storyteller rather than either a writer, artist, or both, or, whatever it is.
No, but because by the end of the day, that's what you are. I mean, I always tell to the kids who are starting, who just do splashy pages, etc., like, I cannot get from point A to point B in this page, not even to point C. What's the point? No, because I want it to be flashy and for the editors to notice. Like, no, you don't get it. The first thing the editors are going to notice is that this makes no sense.
Yes.
Your main work is to be a storyteller, is to tell a story. I suppose that for you, getting to another question here, being able to tell stories is the main point, right? It's not to do amazing looking pages or flashy stories. Is you want to tell stories above all, right?
Right. And don't get me wrong, I like flashy pages. I like to draw flashy pages. But yes, at the end of the day, for me, it is trying to get that story told on the page. Now, the way I write, and I'm sure you've seen this from some of your guys that I've worked with, is that I write and want artists to work from a full plot or from a plot rather than a full script.
Yeah.
I've always been that way because I, as an artist, that's what I wanted to do, right? I wanted, because nasty little secret, most writers, well, maybe I shouldn't say most, but a lot of writers don't really understand writing comics as breaking it down into a sequence of panels. So if I was working with another writer, typically I preferred a plot. There are exceptions to the rule, like when Mike Grell, when I worked with him, he was writing Warlord. He's an artist. He got it. I've worked with Jim Starlin when Jim was writing. He's an artist. He knew what he was doing. Or Archie Goodwin or Denny O'Neil. But as an artist, I generally preferred plot because I always thought I can tell the story better than they can. And I can create drama on the page and tension on the page better than they might be able to. And so that's what I wanted to give my artists. I felt that gave them more of a chance to express themselves and be part of that storytelling effort, and get them kind of drawn in more. And if they got more drawn in and enthusiastic about it, they'd do a better job.
Yeah, that's also about something that I'm going to do like the same you did. Not most songwriters don't understand that, I think, and I think that's exactly what you mean here, is that comics is based on synergy. It's got to be the synergy between the art. If you are the writer and the artist, of course, but also if you are not, it's got to be a synergy between both parts. When you give the plot for the artist to develop how he wants to tell the story, getting back to you, then you dialogue it or, change the dialogues, whatever, adapt. So it's, I'm not talking about Marvel method because what Stan did was a completely different animal.
Right.
But what I mean here is that it gets both parts involved. You don't want your artist to get bored, right?
No, not only do I not want them to get bored, I don't want them to just understand that story or the goal of that story. I want them to understand the characters. And once they understand the characters, then that goes to the nuance of expression that they have on their faces. And it goes to body style. So if the examples I always use are the Teen Titans, like when George Perez was doing them, or the X-Men under Cockerman Byrne, where you'd see them and they'd have these different body shapes. We always knew Wolverine was shorter. We knew Colossus was taller. We knew Storm was really tall. We knew that they transmitted part of their character by their body posture.
Yes.
And what I see too much of now is, here's your group shot of, Justice League or whatever, and they all look great and heroic, but ultimately they all look exactly the same.
Yeah. I don't know if you remember a double spread. I'm pretty sure you do. I always send to artists a double spread from Josh Perez from the Judas Contract. Okay. It's a double spread when they all jump into action, and you can see exactly every character, completely different shape. You have Wally, Kid Flash. He looks like an athlete, like a long distance, like a marathon runner.
Right, exactly.
Dick looks exactly like a gymnast. Coriander looks, very exuberant. But then you have Donna's body, who's like an athlete. everybody looks completely different. Just with that splash page, I always send it to artists and said, look at this. This is your goal. Because with this, he's telling you exactly who each of one of these characters is. And just their body language is telling you everything, right?
Yeah, it's true. I know that I've always tried to communicate, to me, if it's Justice League, Batman should never be front and center. To me, Batman should always be in the background. He's supposedly more of a loner. Yeah. And when I was doing Justice League, when I had Blue Beetle in it, I had Blue Beetle be a little creepier. And to me, he was always off to the side in a weird sort of Spider-Man-esque pose. And I think, the writer doesn't write that in, right? For the most part, that's the artist, and the artist creating his visual language. But that was also at a time when artists would be on a book for 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
And really create that impression. And I think one of the reasons we have lost so much as an industry now is because you can't relaunch a book every 12 issues, because as soon as you do, every writer who comes on Batman wants to do their Joker story, or, and so we're recycling the same material more and more. And a lot of it is because we keep changing the creative teams. And whereas if a creative team stayed on a title and you had a writer and artist on a title and for 4 years, and that artist did 9 or 10 of those issues every single year, that's how you develop continuity of story. I'm not talking about continuity of 60 years. I just mean building story.
Yeah. And also at the same time, that's something that I hate, which is that problem with I understand the level of detail that a lot of artists wants to put, and the perfect example for this is Brian Hitch, of course. Brian Hitch or any other, I can say many names. But at the same time, that means in many cases in this industry, that we cannot keep steady arcs, 6, 7, 8, 9, as you just said, issues with the same artist. And that goes back to the main name on a book is always the writer right now, because you cannot keep the artists in place. And I would keep talking to editors on, to publishers, to in times or CB Now or other people at Marvel, saying there's got to be a way for you guys to space it so the book can keep the artist. Because for readers, in my opinion, and please tell me if you agree, if you're changing artists every 2 months, the reader is not going to stay, or the reader is not going to feel close to that book. They are going to feel alienated in a way, because you need that consistency, right?
Right. Well, first of all, the one thing I have to say is, because we had mentioned Brian Hitch, Brian has been remarkable over the last few years in really delivering work on a monthly basis, and it's sensational stuff. I mean, he is really kicking it out and acing it each and every time. And I'm just so impressed by what he's done and the frequency with which his stuff comes out. So I just want to make sure we take that.
No, I agree with you. I said Brian Hitch because he's the exception precisely because of that, because he started from a point in Ultimates, etc., where it costly to be monthly, but then he found a way.
Yes.
He found a way to keep doing it, which is something that the rest of people who go to that level of detail can't. So I expressed it myself badly, sorry. I meant he's the exception to the rule.
Yeah, okay, very good. Well, just as long as we got that noted. But to the point, I have had many conversations with artists where they express the frustration over the idea that the writer is getting too much of the attention. And that's fair, but you have to dig a little deeper than that, because to beat that, what I always say, then you have to be there.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You have to be there. If you think it's going to be an equal deal, if the writer is writing 12 issues out of the year, and it's got 3 different artists on it through the course of that year, that does not work. It's not 50-50 at that point, because my problem is, as a writer, what I don't like is when I'm writing a story and I don't even know who's going to draw it, because the artist is already so far behind, or I'll write it for one person who then in the last minute backs out and it's another person, and pretty soon I'm getting frustrated and saying, well, if I had time, I would just do it myself. Mm-hmm. But the key is, I came into the business in the day when every artist was really expected to be able to do 2 books a month. And if you could only do 1, they'd say, well, that's okay, but you better get faster. And I know styles have changed, but a lot of it was, there was a time when the expectation was this level in terms of the amount of work you had to provide, and now it's gone way, way down. Mm-hmm. And in some ways we were better as an industry when it was at this level, because that is when writers and artists were recognized more as a team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I meant. That right now there's no teams. And do you think that publishers could change and switch in a sense of getting, for example, those kind of books? For example, Black Label. We can talk about Black Label. Black Label becomes the space for that kind of artist, and then we get. I also talked to Bogdanov about this when I have him here. Like, maybe Black Label should be a repository in a way for that kind of art that needs more time to create the stories, without a month, having that they don't need a monthly schedule, and then go back to artists who can do 8, 9, 10 issues a year. Sorry. So we have that consistency in the monthly books in the Marvel or DC universe.
Sure, that'd be one way. Another way I'd venture is this one. Some years ago, and when I say some years ago, this is like 30 more. I was drawing Green Arrow, and Mike Grell was the writer, and Ed Hannigan was also drawing Green Arrow, and we were doing, I think, like 16 issues a year, because in the summer months we were selling well, and in the summer months we would ship every 2 weeks. Okay. So the way we saw it is, I think Grell, Ed Hannigan, and I saw ourselves as a team. Mm-hmm. And Ed was doing his issues and I was doing my issues, but our styles were not dissimilar. Mm-hmm. So we could still have that attitude of a cohesive group of creators that were splitting the art chores, but the book was still consistent.
Yeah.
So I think that's another way, David, to do it, which is in recognition of the fact that we can't always have the same artist there every month, build the right kind of a team so that it is still a writer and 2 artists then who are consistently working together, building that book. And that allows for better art on the book, which is part of what keeps the fans attracted to it.
Absolutely. That's also right. More or less like what they did in Uncanny X-Men with, if I remember correctly, with Silvestri and Rick Leonardi. Yeah. Which is that every issue that they already knew that any issue that Mark couldn't do, Leonardi would do them. So it was always consistent. You had the main guy and the guy who did the stories, I don't know, when all the X-Men go to the disco or they play baseball or something like that. But you always knew, oh, Silvestri issue, he's not here. Okay, Leonardi is going to do it. So it was also consistent in that way, right?
Right. And I think, that's a perfect example. And that's sort of what we have lost too, and I'm not sure why, but that sense of planning. And again, I think so much of it is this idea that when we look at something like that, it's more of a long-term plan. And now it's built more around, we change out the creative teams every 14 months and we're going to relaunch this book or something like that. So it's the ability to think long-term now and build that as a group of creators is harder because the publishers seem not to want to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the frustrating part about when you want a team to stay on a book and then the people creating that book tells you, well, my publisher told me that we have budget for 10 issues and we'll see.
Right.
Like, yeah, but how can you create a long storyline when you're told that maybe on issue 10 you're going to be canceled?
Yeah. But some of it really is advanced planning. And, on Batman Beyond, I was very fortunate to always work with guys who were there pretty much on a monthly basis so that when we had Rick Leonardi do an arc, then that trade paperback comes out and, Leonardi is the only penciler on it. And it's great. And before that, it was Phil Hester. And Phil Hester is the only name artistically on that book for that arc. And it is something that I have always strived for as a writer because I want the story to look consistent all the way through, especially since I write a plot and not a full script.
Yeah.
And I think the flip side of that is there are an awful lot of writers who really want to exert so much control on the product that ends up they almost don't care enough about who the artist is in some ways. They want it to look good, but then they aren't willing to relinquish some of the control or input to allow for that to happen.
Yeah, I've also mentioned this many times with talking to other writers, Mark Waid and many others. Is my question always is, do you write for the artist? And in some cases, I know the answer is no.
I do.
The answer is I just do it, and I don't care who is. And then you see it on the art. You can obviously see that it's written for because the artist is not that involved. Especially in the anatomy, in the body language. You can see the artist is not involved. He just gets the full brick, as I call those scripts. The full brick is on the table, do it. And I don't care if it's you or your mom or your sister or your brother or the artist from New Zealand. I don't care. But then you see the other side, which is like with you, like writers like you, or as I said, Mark Waid or any others, that you see they're waiting for the artist. So what is the way that you adapt beforehand? I mean, the artist, and then I know his strength. You talk to them before and say, hey, what do you like to draw? What do you hate? So I don't put you on the script.
Right.
Do you have a previous conversation, or do you prefer to get to know them through the art and then change as you go?
Okay, so it's much more of a blend than that, and some of it depends on whether they're new, whether they've been around a while. If I've seen a lot of their work, I know pretty much what their strengths are, and I always try to write to someone's strengths. If it's someone who's newer, I tend not to ask them what they want to draw, because really we are there to serve the story, and I'll try and work with them a few issues and sort of get that feel for what their strength is, and then I will push it that way. Mm-hmm. Because the question of what do you want to draw versus what do you hate to draw too often becomes the easy way out. And I sometimes I have to write that panel that's going to have 50 people in it. And I always say, I almost always say, and you can find a lot of artists who will recognize this, I say, I'm sorry. All right? I apologize, but you didn't see the charge of the light brigade. But I will also say, give me the one good panel that really shows everything. And then in the next couple, you can start using silhouettes and things like that to save time. And I'll try and structure it that way, where I'm really big on in terms of a storytelling technique, David, of give me that one great, awesome establishing shot that shows me the charge of the light brigade. And then I'll quickly try and find a way through that so that you don't have to do that again. And it can be done with silhouette panels. It can be done with isolated close-ups. It can be done with following just one guy on the horse, whatever it might be. I try and facilitate an easier pathway for the artist.
Mm-hmm. And what are the curveballs that Dan, the writer, usually sends to Dan, the artist?
Well, that's a really good question, because I know that if I am writing for me, that I could make the story easier to draw. And that's a dangerous place to be. Yep. So there are times where I'm going to say, okay, here we go. Now you have to do this light brigade, the charge of the light brigade, right? And I make it clear, because as I write the plot, which has to be approved by the editor first, if I'm going to draw it as a skinnier plot, but it's still going to say, 3-point perspective of Metropolis, Superman flying above it. And that way, if it's in print, then I know I have to do it. And I make sure that I get that in so that I don't create that easy way out for me. And as I write for other artists, I always try and call out that particular sort of shot that is going to need that sort of effort. This is, here we go, panoramic shot of the Batcave. And then this happens and that happens. And from time to time, I will get an artist that says, that can't be done because the storytelling sequence gets a little more complicated than that. And I said, yes, it can. And I will draw it out and I will thumbnail it and scan it and send it to them. And it might just be, it's more than stick figures, but anybody can understand, here's how you pace it so it can work.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I will do that quite a lot.
And do you find often that when you write for yourself, you make it more difficult than you would do for somebody else?
Yeah, I do, and part of it is because when I write for myself, it now means I'm really into the story. So if I'm into the story, I really want to communicate that. And it's funny because I just wrote and drew a story for Detective Comics 1027.
Mm-hmm.
And so as part of that, I'm sort of going to describe the last panel of the entire story here. But we go back to 1939 when Batman first showed up. And so I really wanted to communicate that in the panel. And so I drew a newsboy hawking a newspaper with the old style hats from 1939 and the architecture and the old car and everything. And I really wanted to nail that right because we have to sell that time. It took me, and Kevin Nolan inked the story. It's just beautiful. And but I really needed to nail that to communicate that part of the story. So there was no cheating, and a ridiculous amount of effort went into that panel, which is panel 5 on a page, but it is all part of communicating that aspect of the story. And so when we got done with it and we were divvying up the art, I took that one I sold, and I had told Kevin, he did a brilliant job of inking it and really selling that in that panel. And that's why I wanted to keep that page, because it was all about, this is 1939.
Mm-hmm. What is for you, I'm not going to answer. What is for you, what makes the comics language so special, so unique?
I think it is the ability. So if you sit in a movie, you think of the visual clues you get in a movie, whether it's the way the music builds, that they cut the scene faster, so you get all of a sudden more shots in 10 seconds. It's going boom, 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 boom. And I think what makes comics unique for me that way is the ability to do that visually on a page. In comics, if we want to slow down the flow of time on a page, we add panels. And you can just take it and go zoom, and then it takes the reader, if you put 12, 14, 15 panels on a page, which really slows time down into a slow motion effect, the reader spends more time on that page, right? Yeah. So that's how we do slow motion. If we want to make things bigger, we don't have music, but we can get into full page spreads, double page spreads, triple page, if we can get a publisher to give us the fold, which I've been able to do a couple of times. It's that ability to tell any story in comics, that we can make it as big as, the Fantastic Four fighting Galactus, yeah, on a different planet, in a different universe, or as small as 2 people in a room. And I once drew a Nightwing story that Marv Wolfman wrote. And Marv had Dick Grayson as Nightwing buried alive. And a lot of it takes place with Dick in the casket. It's like, oh my God, how do you tell a story of a character buried alive in a casket? And because it's in the most confined space you can imagine. And it became quite a challenge, I thank Mark for it later, to figure out a way to make that work, right? So I think that these are the things we can do in comics. We're so much more elastic in a way than any other medium. And that's what I like about it, that we can do anything that way.
Yeah, I always tell, I also always apologize to the guys watching this, because I always tell the same reference. I'm sorry, I love it. That comics is the only art that can defy Einstein's theory of relativity, because we fully control time and space, and no other art does. And I mean that you can tell a story 22 pages happening at the same second, or going back and forth, or just, moving an object like this, putting this bottle here, not saying anything. I can say that some time has passed, etc., etc. Do you agree with that? That it's the only art who can control time and space without any limitations?
Probably, and I only say probably, David, because I've not made a movie. but yeah, I think that is certainly true for the most part, if not all the way. That it is a singularly unique language. One of the examples like that I always use is mouse. the graphic novel, which who would have thought you could tell the story of the Holocaust with mice and rats? You know what I mean? That to actually have such a brilliant portrayal of such a horrific subject. If someone would have told me about that before I ever saw it or heard anything about it, I said, well, that can't be done. Yeah. But then we do see it done, and it's brilliant, and it's on the page. So, and I think that goes to that point, that we can do things in a singularly unique way on paper than any other medium.
Mm-hmm. Do you want us to go with some fun questions?
Sure.
So they don't feel abandoned. Okay. Lofran Howard says, hello. Hi from Brazil, Carlos Mello. Hi, Dan. It's an honor to meet you. Carlos Mello said, love the work of Mr. Jurgens, both writing and drawing. Daniel Ureña, hello from Costa Rica. Hello. The comics habla así. Dan, so much stuff from him that I love. Agustin Jimenez says, is that God? I guess he means you.
Not quite.
Okay, Log from Howard asks, big question. What was the original reason? Logfran, I guess this question has been asked to him like a million times. But anyway, I will ask it again. What was the original reasons for the death of Superman? To get better because they were going lower, to fight against Image. What was the reason?
No, it had nothing to do with Image. It only had to do with this, and that is Superman 75 was coming up. And originally, we had thought that would be the wedding of Clark and Lois. They came with a TV series called Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman or whatever. So we said, all right, we will work with the TV series, because they said, if we last for a couple of years, we'll eventually get to the wedding, okay? So we needed a different story. And we had talked almost jokingly in previous meetings about great stories to do. And we had joked about Death of Superman. So on this one, I walked into the meeting and I had two ideas written on a yellow legal pad. One was Death of Superman, and the other one was Monster Trashes Metropolis. And I had the second one because at that time, almost all of Superman's villains were like mind villains or manipulative villains, not physical confrontational type of villains. And so it was Lex Luthor, who was a businessman, or Brainiac, who was something of a telepath at that point, or Mr. Z, and people who dressed like in normal clothing. I just wanted to draw a kick-ass fight, and so I had mentioned at one point, then Jerry Ordway, who was in the room, also said, let's just kill him. And we started talking about it. And our editor, Mike Carlin, was very big on why. Why would we do that? And what we began to realize is this, and that is that when you take someone away, that's when you really analyze the importance of what they mean. It happens to us in our own personal lives, right? Mm-hmm. And that's when you really think of someone and their impact on you. And we began to realize that if we did the death of Superman, the story would not necessarily be about the death of Superman as much as the result of the death of Superman in a world with no Superman. And how does that impact the DCU and everything else? So then we worked back to how would it be done? And, we talked about, would it be Lex Luthor? Would it be Brainiac? And we then got onto this idea of someone new, and this idea that I wanted to do of a tremendous fight that just crashes Metropolis. And we started talking about someone who digs themselves up out of the ground and sort of marches through across the globe, and someone new becoming Superman's foe. And at that point, I sat there and I actually doodled the original sketch of Doomsday and said, you mean like this? And we built from there. And it really was to tell the death of Superman story, to replace what had already been planned, but more importantly, to tell a really good story about Superman's importance to the world. Mm-hmm. And that became a big win for us, because at that same time, once we removed Superman from books, columnists were writing story columns, newspaper columns about what does it say about us that we have killed Superman, and so reality and fiction were kind of coming together in a way, which was very nice. And it made for a much more powerful story that way. And ultimately then, to carry it through, to do the return of Superman with 4 characters claiming to be Superman, we were totally in sync. And the world was right for it. When I say world, the market. And we were really able to put together what I still think is a really good Superman story.
Oh, it's an amazing story. Every time somebody who hasn't read it, of course, talks about the gimmick of the death of Superman, I said, just read the story. That was a really well-crafted story. It wasn't a gimmick. But Dan told me, and I think Karen also told me that, Jerry always made the same joke. Every time you got to a meeting, it was, let's kill him. Until it got to a point when you guys found a reason and found, as you said, the why and the repercussions, right?
Yeah, it was never a gimmick. The idea, first of all, anytime we do a story, we hope it's going to be a good story and that it sells. Yeah. We never sit there and say, let's do a sucky story that doesn't sell, right? You never do that. And so we always want to do something that we think is good and will sell. But I think later, after we planned the story, we didn't call for black bags or anything like that. That came later. And that was more marketing that came up with some of those things that I think you can call gimmicks, but the story was never a gimmick. And the real wild part about it is everyone thinks of sort of that black bag edition that had the armbands and the posters and everything else in them, which was somewhat gimmicky, but it was cool. It was a cool package. And I've always said, thank God Paul Levitz signed off on all that stuff and made it happen. And then even more importantly, right before Christmas, putting it all together as the Death of Superman trade paperback, because in those days, that wasn't automatic like it is now. For a story to get collected as a trade paperback then, that was rare. And DC did it, and they got it out right away, which made it more satisfying for people.
Okay. So Blake Rayval asks, Dan, what was your favorite part of working with John Romita Jr.?
Well, this would go back to our storytelling discussion a little bit.
Yeah.
There is no finer storyteller in this business than John Romita Jr. And John is absolutely fantastic that way. That whatever I gave him as a writer, he elevated. And that's what, as artists, that's what we all hope to do. And John took what I gave him and he made the story better. He is the epitome of storytelling in comics. And so what John also understood, and this was more a Marvel thing than a DC thing, but the value of power on the page. Mm-hmm. That with John drawing Thor, and we did it for 2 years, John could really communicate that idea that Thor was a god. And when I went on the book, I kept saying, all right, if you're going to say this is the god of thunder, let's portray him like a god. And so John elevated that, and Thor had this sense of power and this sense of majesty and presence that made him godlike. And we ran with it for 2 years, and he was just brilliant at that. And it was an honor to work with him. I hope to do it again soon one day, and we'll see. And then we were lucky enough to when John moved on, have Andy Kubert come on and do the book. So I was really lucky when I was doing Thor that we had tremendous art on the book.
Did you notice any difference between working for Marvel or DC, or for you it was the same as a writer or an artist?
There were definite differences, and they're, it's just because they're different places with different people, and as you know, they have different business practices, so there are certainly differences there. I always approached it as, this is how I work. One of the things I've always liked to do, David, is work with people that I enjoy working with. That's crucial. And there were people at both places that I genuinely enjoyed working with, and I enjoyed my time at both. But yeah, they were very different. And at that time, I think Marvel probably did put a little bit more of a premium on the artists than did DC. That changed eventually, mm-hmm. But at that time, that was certainly the case.
Mm-hmm. Also, you've worked with icons, Superman, Spider-Man, Captain America, Thor. What is, for you, what defines each and every one of them?
To me, Superman is still the cornerstone of comics, and to me, Superman should always be the cornerstone of comics. And I always see a very particular place that he should fit into. And in many ways, I think that's true of Captain America at Marvel as well, because they both symbolize so much more than just their stories, but in different ways. And I think that's very important. I think Captain America to me is more about an American ideal when it is at its best, whereas Superman is more about a global idea and community when that is at its best.
Yes.
Spider-Man, I think, is more about the portrayal of the conflict of a normal human person who is trying to be a hero. And that then carries over to anyone who's a firefighter or a cop or anything else. That, to me, that's what Spider-Man is. And Thor, to me, is, I mean, at its core, it's about a family conflict in a way between a father and a son, and the son and his brother. But at the same time, with Thor, I think there are aspects of nobility to be played with. But still, through all of that, I see them all as different. But as somehow, to me, Superman is still always the cornerstone of who we should be, and in a way, what the industry should be.
Mm-hmm. And that takes me to when you're planning a story, as a writer artist, what is more important for you? The structure of the story itself, where you're gonna go. We always say the journey or the destination, depending on who, or the emotion, the character.
Well, I think you have to have the character and the emotion first, and then you work on the destination second. And so, for example, if I talk about the Superman Lois and Clark series I wrote that Lee Weeks drew, that was all about character and emotion. And it was all about Lois and Clark living in this kind of life of isolation with their son, John. And this is, I had done the story where John was born like a year earlier, and this was John as an 8-year-old. And that story to me was all about character. It is, how are they as parents? How do they interact with John? And then you blend that with the adventure and the kind of story that Superman would have, the flight and the fight and everything else. But I think to really get it right, you start with character and build from there.
Mm-hmm. Let me see. Angel Perez asks, Mr. Jurgens, could you tell us how you and the rest of the teams in Death of Superman, Reign of Superman, etc., were able to coordinate, share the different issues, all the highlights, etc.?
Oh, yeah. I mean, at that time, we were lucky. We were a really good team of people. And, for writers, it was Roger Stern, Louise Simonson, Jerry Ordway, and me. Artistically, we had Tom Grummett, John Bogdanov, me, and Butch Geis, and we all worked very tightly together. But the most important thing is we had Mike Carlin as editor, who was really, really good at making sure we coordinated. So first, we planned well, in terms of our stories. We wrote it out on the board and created, the outlines for the next, say, 8 issues for each of the 4 books. We generally stuck to it. We had respect for each other's work, and we tried to make it work. And I think everybody knew within that scenario that we were greater than the sum of our parts, that if we worked together as a team, that would build something much better than if we worked as individuals. Mm-hmm. And we also tried to leave room for everybody to write and create as an individual from time to time and do their own stories. But the biggest one was we committed to that ideal, that Mike asked us to commit to that ideal, and we did. And that Mike was able to facilitate that. And we could really, I think what we were doing was somewhat experimental. Nothing had been done to that level before. And build this, not only this story that could go on, but this group of this supporting cast of characters that everybody got into as well.
Do you miss it? Do you meet that level of coordination between a lot of books and a lot of that was like, okay, we got it done.
Yeah.
That's enough.
I would do it again in kind of limited fashion if I knew I was going to do it for a year. And I've done other things like that. You know, I wrote Future's End, which was a series that we did, a weekly series.
Yep.
And that was Jeff Lemire, Brian Azzarello, Keith Giffen, and me. So I did it there. Doing it a little bit now on a project called Generations that I'm writing with Andy Schmidt and Rob Venditti. So I can still do it. I still want to have a place where I can do my own thing. And I think that's what's always important. And I think it is important creatively. If you're an artist, once you're done drawing, say, 10 issues of Batman, you should do something really different, right? And go do Flash, go do Aquaman, go do Spider-Man, do something different. And I always tried to do that artistically. And I think as a writer, it's really important to try and do that as well. So that at one time, you know, I was writing Superman and Spider-Man simultaneously. And so to do characters that were so different, that's really good for you as a writer.
Yeah. Let me see. Blake Rival asks you, what is the art you are most proud of?
The art?
Yeah.
Well, I am The Death of Superman. Very proud of Superman Aliens when I did that. Kevin Nolan inking, because I tried to do something very, very different that way. There have been, I did a Superman Fantastic Four crossover that was treasury size. So that was a lot of fun to do. R.T. Bear inked that. Very proud of the way that came out. I think even like doing something like Booster Gold, where I found more of my voice as a writer / artist.
Live streaming is on.
You were supposed to be back again. Whatever. And I was gonna say about Booster Gold. This is the book that I always thought, from the other side of the fence, of course, that you would be most proud of, because that's what I found, as I said before, the synergy as a writer artist yourself.
Yes,
I saw it in other places, of course, but there was when I saw it. Almost at every time I was like, this is the artist feeding the writer, and the writer feeding the artist at all times. You know, just enjoying the synergy for your own work, right?
Yeah, I think that's very true. And the first 5-6 issues, you can really see this is a kid trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
And it was kind of DC to pay me as I worked out those bugs. But ultimately I started to, and I think more than anything I've ever done, you can see the growth of a creator on the page as the series unfolded. And I've often said, you know, I wish I would have known by the time I got done with it after a couple of years, I wish I would have had those skills in place when I started it, but I didn't. But it's still fun to come back to from time to time. And yeah, that's what really allowed me to grow and figure things out. And by the time, from where I was when I started to where I was when I got done, I was a completely different person.
Yeah, and then I know that's also, I guess, one of the reasons you could always, aside of him being your creation, one of the reasons you could always come back to him, in a way, it's got to be that for you, he represents your growth as a creator, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's always going back in a different stage of your career as a creator, knowing that you can play with him in a different way, in a more mature way, in a way.
Well, not just that, but I think part of it was, even when I would have started it, people, because I hadn't written a lot yet at that point, I'd done a few stories. I think everyone still saw me as an artist who dabbled with the idea of wanting to write from time to time. By the time I got done, I was a writer-artist. There was no question. People knew that they could call me up, and if they wanted to offer me work as an artist, they could offer me work as a writer or both. And by the time I got done with that, I had solidified that status, which can be hard to do. And that's the other thing. I have an awful lot of artists who tell me, gee, they want to be a writer, but no one will give them a chance. And I say, then you have to make your own chance and you have to force it. And you have to commit to it 100% and not back down. Don't let anyone talk you out of it. And fortunately, right now, we have a lot of different ways to publish in this industry, which didn't exist then. But you have to 100% say, I'm going to make it happen.
Yeah, you have to push it. You have to show your work. Even if they are not going to publish you first as a writer, just go and do it. And you have webtoons, you have webcomics, you have a lot of open spaces right now to do it. Right? It's just don't let them stop you.
Yeah, exactly. And the hard part is during that journey, people will offer you stuff that you'll say, "Boy, I would love to do that," but you have to say no.
Yeah,
and because there's only one way to get there, and that's that you have to commit to it.
Yeah, it's the ability for the artist that I always have to teach them is you have to learn to say no.
Yes.
If you want to get to the point you want to get as an artist in your evolution, or to write, as you said before, you have to say no. You have to learn to say no, and it's so difficult for you guys as artists to do it, right?
Yeah, well, it is, but the other part of it is and this has happened to all of us, where we've said yes to something. And almost always, it's one of those projects that has kind of your spidey sense stink anyway. And you say yes to something, and then you're 3 issues into it, and you made a mistake, and that it's one you shouldn't be doing. And if you had it to do all over again, you would say no to. Sometimes you just say, we're better off being done right here. Other times you stick it out because it's part of being a professional. And but it's never fun to get locked into one of those things.
No, but it's also, I guess, especially in your case, when you have this relationship with editors, that are such long term, that sometimes you just stay with it because you don't want to harm the editor, or you want to be faithful to him or her. So it's like, you know what, I'm going to finish at least this original saga, original run,
right?
And then we'll move on. But your body and your mind are saying, I want to just fucking leave on issue 2.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But just stick it out for them, right?
Yes, exactly right. Like I said, it's part of being a professional. There are a lot of aspects, I think, of being a professional where things like that come into play, and it's important to recognize.
Yeah, and people should be more professional in many ways, because that is sticking to and helping the other side of the equation. In this case, the editors, is also part of being professional. It's not only about helping yourself, because in the long term, they're going to remember,
right,
who was in the way and who was part of the people who brought this to the finish line, right?
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right.
Okay, let me see. Okay, Kimo asks, Superman with or without briefs? Aren't they sort of like
that is so easy for me. That is just so easy. It's with. But I want to explain it, because we used to talk about this all the time when we were working on the books. We never saw it as Superman puts on a red suit and then pulls on a pair of red briefs. We always said it's one piece, and that's how it was sewn. That you have a red portion and a red or a blue portion and a red portion, and then the blue legs, but it's all sewn in as one piece. Mm-hmm. And that's always how we interpreted it, that if Superman could not take off those red briefs. It was all part of one costume. Perhaps he could buckle the belt. But I think what's important is the S shield is one of the most famous symbols throughout the globe. Yeah. You take an S, you draw it in a triangle, everybody knows what that is. Across the entire world. It is red and it's yellow, and everybody knows that. And if that is the only yellow on the costume doesn't work. The costume needs the yellow belt more than anything. Another splash of yellow. It needs the yellow symbol on the back of the cape, and it needs, I still say, the red at the middle of the costume as well. That's what pulls everything together. That's what makes the boots come into it. The version we had during New 52, which was just the chest emblem and then a red belt and red boots, there was something missing. And I keep looking at it and saying, this is one of the most famous, iconic looks in the entire world. Why are we messing with it? And a good Superman story is not defined by whether or not he has the red so-called trunks. It is, if you're worrying about that, you're worrying about the wrong thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the same that, why mess with something that works?
Yeah.
Why mess with the iconic? And I always put, the same 3, 4, 5 examples. Why could you change Captain America? Why could you change Spider-Man? Why could you change Superman? Why could you change, there's 3 or 4 that, okay, of course, Spider-Man had the black suit that worked, but these are different reasons. But if you have really iconic suits that have been there forever and work. Why would you mess with them? Why would you taint them? I don't care about the trunks. I care about the story.
Yeah, yeah. But I would say then the default position should not be Superman with the red trunks, because that should always be what it looks like. The default position is, if you want to do something different then, and we did this during the Lois and Clark, Superman Lois and Clark book, is put him in the black costume with the silver S shield. Yes. Because that, to me, when we did that, I wanted to give him this sense of dignity and a Superman who was more in the shadows.
Yes.
And so it was all symbolic of that, because, continuity at the time sort of demanded it. But to have this Superman moving behind the scenes in this black suit, I think is a very powerful image as well. And it gives him a sense of stature that I really like.
I always thought that the black suit made him regal, in a way. Yes. Like the older, even if he's not older, the older statesman that is there, and everybody looks at him, and automatically with that look, they think of him as, I won't say a king, but you know what I mean, as the regal image, as the statesman that everybody else should learn from, Oh,
sure. Let's put it, if you're going to go to a wedding, you dress up, you put on a black suit and tie, right? I mean, that's what it was. It was Superman formal.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's see. Next question here. Angel Perez asks, now you're writing Richard Grayson in Nightwing. How is he different from Dick? And this question he's not going to ask, is a spoiler. And what can we expect for the Mummy return during the Joker War?
Well, Nightwing 74 just came out, and in that issue, it gets because I don't know how much everybody has seen by now yet. So I'll just say that by the end of the issue, it's all reconciled. Okay. And then in Nightwing 75, which is a double-sized story that I just signed off on the color and lettering here Friday, really cements it. So we're finally back to it. Let's put it that way.
Okay, how did it feel for you to write Rick and not Dick? Like the character you've known and loved forever. And it was weird iteration.
Yeah, it was tough only in this sense, David, and that is when I first signed on, we kind of had the understanding that I would do it for like 5 or 6 issues, and then we would move to Nightwing Dick Grayson. Yeah. And you know how things go sometimes through a lot of different external factors. We had to continue it and then continue it more and carry it on a little longer. It went longer than I would have liked. I think the one thing I was able to do is when they made the decision that he gets shot and as a result has amnesia, I thought there had to be more intent to it. So I did an annual, the 2019 annual, really said that it was a plot that was orchestrated by the Court of Owls. And I'm very happy with what we came up with there, because I think it made it much more a true Nightwing / Batman story, and to have an evil presence behind it rather than just have it happen as a byproduct and then try. One of the other problems was 4 other people who were dressed up trying to be Nightwing. I had to get out of that. I wish I could have stuck to the original timeline in terms of reconciling everything. Unfortunately, I could not. That's my only regret.
Okay. Gonzalo Rayas, Mr. Jurgens, what are your feelings about Booster Gold? We already touched on that. And how the character has evolved through the years. Who do you think has written Michael the best besides you, of course?
Jeff Johns was brilliant when we were doing the book together. Jeff was writing it and I was drawing it for the first year. I would also say, when he was in Justice League, when Keith Giffen and Mark DeMatteis were doing it, I always said, because they called me up and said, we want to put Booster in the Justice League. You okay with that? And at that point, I don't even think the first issue of Justice League was out yet. I had seen a black and white copy that someone had sent me. And I said, sure, that's great. What do you want to do with them? And they got, at first, when Booster first showed up, the connection with Blue Beetle wasn't there. That came over time. But I always looked at it and said, it's part of Earth Keith. And I saw it this way, is, you know how you and a friend can maybe go to a party and you come back from the party and you saw it one way and your friend saw it the other, from a continuity standpoint, you were both at the same party, but you would describe it differently to friends.
Yeah.
So I always said the stuff in Justice League happened, but Keith's descriptions of how that story went down were way different than mine. So it was earth-giving.
Okay, that's good. Okay, then he also asked, do you by any chance will work again with Booster soon, with Booster Gold? I really love what you did with him.
Yeah, it's funny that they asked because he just shows up. These issues aren't out yet, but they will be soon. Booster shows up in Batman Beyond, numbers 48 and 49. Booster is going to be in the New Generations project that we just announced last week. And we're talking about a couple of things down the road, so we'll see.
Okay. No spoilers, guys. Love from Howard asks, why was your era on Spider-Man so short? Did you have any editorial interference? Was it a surprise? For me, it was a surprise, he said, that you left DC being such an important creator for them.
Yeah, I would never say editorial interference, because that's what editors are supposed to run a project, right? So I can't call it editorial interference. I can only say this, really, which is I had hoped it would go on longer, but it just wasn't the right mix. I got along with the writers, I got along with the editorial staff, but somehow the mix just wasn't right. And a lot of it was I could not do the type of stories that I wanted to do. And you can't go in and say, make all these changes. So I just said, I shouldn't be here. And we kind of let it go with that. And, ultimately, there were no lasting hard feelings, because it was only a year and a half later that I went back to Marvel to do Thor. Mm-hmm. It just, when I got hired, I had said, these are the type of Spider-Man stories I want to do, whether it's with Peter Parker or Ben Reilly, in a way, almost didn't matter so much as trying to do the types of stories I wanted to do. And then when I got there, for a multitude of different reasons, I just couldn't get it done. So I left.
Okay. Let me see. Are there any books or that you're excited to read? And any other creators that you are excited to work with?
Oh, there are a lot that I like to read and work with. I know I just this week, I picked up the first 2 issues of Bad Mother, which Mike Deodato is doing. And it's like, wow, this is awesome. So it's fun to see that. I think that Stray Bullets is always one of my favorite reads. I try and keep up with what's happening at Marvel and DC, reading those, because I think that's always important to recognize. I thought the conclusion to Walking Dead, when that came out, was fantastic. So I try and keep up with kind of what's happening out there and what people are doing. I think Sex Criminals is a great book. So I think there's a lot of really good and very different stuff out there right now.
Mm-hmm. And the other side part of the question, which any creator that you're excited to work with, that you would want to work with, that you haven't yet?
Oh, wow. Who haven't I worked with? I'm so lucky because I've gotten to work with so many different people, and most everybody I've wanted to. Well, I have not worked with Mike Deodato yet. I know at DC, I have never yet written for like Brad Walker or Jason Fabok or David Finch. I mean, there are certainly people I would like to work with at this point. I'm also, there are people I would like to draw again. I just it was only 1 page, but the Legion of Superheroes had an issue recently that Brian Michael Bendis wrote that was 20 pages, 20 different artists. So it was fun just to do that, because Bendis and I had not worked together since I was at Marvel. He wrote an Avengers story that I drew. So it was fun to do that again. So it's also fun to work with writers I haven't worked with.
Yeah, that was also part of the question, I guess, to work with the people you would like to work with that you haven't yet, but also the people you could die to work again with, right?
Oh yeah. And it's always fun. Like getting to work with JR Jr. again would be great. Andy Kubert, same thing. Stuart Immonen is another one because he had done Thor for a while. Plus, we worked together on Superman, and it's been a long time. So, yeah, it's a healthy mix. And what I do is I value the fact that I also go back far enough that I was able to work with Gil Kane and John Buscema and Kurt Swan and so many others. And that to me is important, having been able to work with guys that I admired so much. And for writers, Len Wein and Marv Wolfman and Jerry Conway and so many more, that I really value the fact that I've been able to be in the business as long as I have. And from the continuum of when I started to have gone all this way and worked with the previous generations, and now am working with the younger ones.
That takes me to a question. I don't know if you have, but in case you haven't, why are you not teaching? Because you encompass so many generations that I think this is invaluable knowledge for the next generation of creators.
Yeah, and it's something I think about more and more, David. And one of the reasons is, or not one of the reasons, and one of the things I come back to is, as we have moved into an industry, as you know, that now has more full script as a writer's technique than we ever used to. I think the fact that I both write and draw kind of makes me uniquely qualified to be able to say, build a bridge and kind of get us back to a more cohesive kind of effort across the board between writers and artists, and maybe getting away from that full script technique, which I would like to see happen, being so pervasive. For the writers who have that down and totally have it nailed, great. I have no desire to make them do something different, but there's a lot who are doing it that way who don't. And I think there's a very unique place and a dialogue to be had in how artists and writers work together and how we can better facilitate that.
Yeah, that takes us back to the synergy between artists and writers we were talking about before. I just remember that I asked you because I just remember that, when I had Peter Bagg, he told me that he was contacted by the Great Courses and that he's doing, also classes on that platform, as writing an artist with his style, of course, and in his way. But I think would be really valuable for the new generation, as you said, because you encompass really different generations. So you think as both as a writer and an artist. And again, more important, you think about that synergy that we need to have in comics. That's what really makes us comics, and not just a novelist trying to get to cram his stuff and just have the drawings in there.
Right. I don't know this. I don't know this for a fact, but I think if you were to add up the quantity of all my work as a writer and as an artist, and as a writer artist, I don't think there's been anybody who's done more of both than me. I don't think so. Maybe, but I don't think so.
I don't have. I agree with you. I think so. That's another reason why you have to teach.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe I should.
Let's see what happens. Look who I have here. Jose Luis Garcia Lopez is here. He says, hello. Nice to have you back. Thank you, Jose Luis. I love you.
Yes.
And with Dan Jurgens, nothing less. My best for both of you.
Oh, well, and my best to him. And he's another one that I've been able to work with in a couple of different ways. I was so honored to be able to write for Jose. And when we did the Death of Superman Kids Edition, Louise Simonson wrote it. This was a book. Louise Simonson wrote it. I drew it, and Jose inked me. So, yes, that was awesome. And
that's really special.
So, Jose, my best.
That's really special that you got inked by Jose. That's good.
Yes.
Every time he shows up on the chat, I always do the same.
Yes.
We are not worthy. We are not worthy.
Yeah.
Anyway, Francisco Sanchez says, in Thor, where did you get the idea to make Thor king? And why did you add another human alter ego?
Right. A couple of reasons. I always liked the Donald Blake character with Thor, but we decided to do something different because I made him Jake Olsen, a paramedic, because it got Thor out onto the streets and into the story, whereas Don Blake was a doctor in an office. Mm-hmm. And I thought having an an alternate identity that got him on the streets was a really interesting way to get him out among the people. As for the King Thor type stuff, right from the very first issue that JR and I did, I had people on the street saying, "Are you really a god? They say you're a god. Is that true? What does that mean?" And I wanted to make that a theme of the book right from the start. And I thought, people would say, well, if there was really a Superman, he would get rid of all the guns in the world, stuff like that. No, that would never be Superman's character. Superman sees himself as someone who leads by example and creates, I think, the moral conditions for people to behave in a better way. Thor, as a god to me, is someone who would start to play around with some of those topics. And that's how I tried to write him. And that is what part of what we wanted to do right from square one, is establish him as a god. And if you establish yourself that way, Thor is much more likely to step in and be dictatorial, almost fascist, without being a fascist, but to exercise authoritarian behavior.
Because he sees himself as the ruler in a way, right? He's a ruler.
Yeah, that's what gods were. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. That's what they were, and that's the theme I wanted to play with.
Yeah, you worship them, and then you responded to them, and they were the deciders of your destiny. Yes. So Thor knows he's the decider of your destiny since 4,000 years ago. So is it normal for him to react that way, right?
Yeah, I right from the start. I mean, I said, and I don't know that this had ever been in the book before, but this is true. Thursday as a day is named after Thor. And I just flat out said, it's Thor's Day. Man, once you have a day of the week named after you, what does that do to your ego, right? So we're going to go with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, Lockfran says, how did you have the time to be everywhere at the beginning of the 90s? Series with Superman, Justice League, 0 Hour. How did you manage it?
I think I mentioned earlier that I worked crazy hours. I worked all the time, and part of it was in the early 90s, comic sales were so great, a lot of people would do an issue and get rewarded financially, and they would take time off. And for me, I recognized that this was a sort of a temporary thing we were in. So I wanted to do more. I enjoyed the stuff I got to do. I was able to do almost anything I wanted. And, when you have that kind of a condition, it never lasts forever.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed what I did. I got to do some really fun stuff. I'd say, I want to do this project called Superman Doomsday Hunter Prey, where we do the origin of Doomsday. Boom, green light, go do it. And that's how I worked at that time. And it was a great way to be able to do it. So yeah, I worked just crazy hours. I really did. By the time I got done with 0 Hour, I was so burned out. That was the hardest I ever worked. And what I always tell people is, and you've been around long enough to know this, right? There was a time we didn't have computers, and so I had every DC book that was being published. I had a stack in their weekly shipping order on my floor. So each and every book, here was Batman, here was Detective, here was Green Lantern, whatever it might be. Here were the new books we were going to do. And it was a stack of paper like this high, because it would be scripts and then the pencils and then the pencils and inks, because they would send me the Xeroxes. There was no computer really. We had some things, but not like scans.
Nope.
And you could not walk through my studio. There was so much paper there. So yeah, by the time I got done with that, because 0 Hour, I wrote it and drew it, and it came out every week for 5 weeks. No one could do that now. There's no person in this industry who would do that now, I don't think. So, a weekly ship on a company-wide crossover with 5 issues by the same person, writer and artist. Now they would do it with one writer and 5 different artists. So,
or more than one writer.
Yeah. I mean, seriously. So it was a very different environment, and I was glad to be a part of it in retrospect.
Yeah, and also in retrospect, as you were mentioning before, they let you do what you wanted to do, which means you were enjoying it. Yes. I don't think you would have been able at all to pull that off, that much work, with if you were hating it, right? You would like burn out much faster than you did.
Yeah. I mean, even Superman Aliens, that was dreamed up when Mike Carlin and Mike Richardson and I were on a trip together. We went to a sales conference in Hawaii. I think there was a diamond sales conference and a convention there. And then from there, we went to Australia for a convention. And we were out to eat one night and we dreamed, what if Superman and the aliens cross over and blah, blah, blah. And when we first kind of ran it past 20th Century Fox, as I recall, they said no because Superman wasn't a big enough character. Well, by the time we did Death of Superman, they were looking for it. So, yeah, and at that point, it became fun to do. So why not? And then, even a few years later, when we did DC versus Marvel, to be able to draw that first crossover between Marvel and DC, that was a very special thing to be able to do. So I was, it's not like any artist was going to say no to that. So no matter how busy you were going to make time for it, right?
Yeah. The DC versus Marvel stuff cannot be reprinted, right? I think it just stays in there. That's a shame.
I would think that's the case. Now, I don't know that 100%, but we certainly haven't seen any of that stuff reprinted for quite some time.
I think it was a one-time thing that they can reprint. It's a shame, but at least we got it, right?
Yeah, because I know like the Superman Fantastic Four crossover I did was treasury sized.
Yeah.
Which was cool to see. Well, what was really nice is a couple of the European editions, no surprise, I can't remember if it was Urban or not, but they did hardcover editions. It's like, nice, big, wow, why can't we have this in America? So that was fun to see. I'd love to see that reprinted in a good quality sort of effort like that.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Angel Perez says, in your run in Batman Beyond, did you rewatch the cartoons for reference, or talked with Paul Dini or Bruce Timm about it, or you prefer to, or did you prefer to do your own story from scratch?
Oh no! So my kids had watched it when it first came on TV, right? Because I think my kids, I had two boys, and I think they were 9 and 6 or 10 and 7 when that came out. So they'd watch it, and I'd see it. I'd pass through the room and I'd see it. Oh, that's pretty cool. And I caught a couple of episodes. I liked what I saw. So then later, when it came down to writing it, I absolutely went out and I bought the collected set of DVDs, and I sat down and I watched it again. So I wanted to be very true to the concept of what it was, because it really was cool. It was sort of like, take Batman, put him in the future, add a little bit of Spider-Man to it, and you've got Batman Beyond. And that was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. Pablo Cabo Garcia asks, who do you think is the writer who's writing the best stuff right now in DC?
My favorite thing that I just read from DC that I thought was outstanding was by Jeff Johns and Jason Fabok. And it was the Joker book that just came out that established the 3 different Jokers. And it has the 9-panel grid and everything. So that makes it feel a little bit like the Alan Moore, Brian Bolland effort. And so it took it in a nice, deep direction. I like what they did with the Red Hood and everything. So that, to me, is the favorite thing I read recently, which is going to get 15 other writers mad at me. But I just mean in most recent terms, I mean, it really, as I read it, I saw, wow, I love this. This is great.
Well, it's the last. You can just say it's the last one I read, so I love it. Tomorrow,
and it's just about it. Yeah, it's just about it. So I will say that. Yes.
Okay. Blake Rival asks, what's the original piece? Your favorite piece of original art that you own?
I don't know if you can see it. I've got a page from Superman 75 on the wall behind me. So that would be one that I did. I have also got things by other artists that mean a lot to me, including a nice big poster that the aforementioned Jose Luis Garcia Lopez did, which is of all the DC characters. He must have done that around like 1976, 77. So it's got the Legion of Superheroes from that time, the Teen Titans from that time, the Huntress from that time. So that's a complete favorite of mine. I've got a couple of, I've got a wonderful Batman page by Neil Adams from the Joker's Five-Way Revenge. So I've got some stuff that means something to me personally because of it meant what it meant when it came out, and I was a reader, and other things that were given to be my friends of mine were in the business and what it means to me because they're friends that I love. So it's quite a mixture that way.
Yeah, in my case, most of the art that I own is given by friends from the industry, and this is the one that you treasure the most, the moments and the whys that you get that art. I guess the same for you, right?
Yeah. And it's always very moving when something like that happens, and I appreciate it tremendously and do what I can to return the gesture.
Okay. Rafael Bonillo says, "Damn, I'm at work right now, but I wanted to take just a little break in order to thank you for all your work, not only in Superman, Thor, Spider-Man, but also in Booster Gold. You've been a great influence in my comic book tastes."
Oh, that's so nice of him to say. Thank you.
Lofenhoer says, was there something of Walter Simonson's era in Thor on your own era in Thor? And do you see that what Jason Aaron did is in a way a continuation of the stuff you did? He means about the Butcher of Gods, King Thor, etc.
Yeah, I that would be a better question for Jason than it would be for me. And so it's hard for me to answer that one. In terms of Walter's Thor, I thought what Walter did was so unique and individual to Walter. It's not that I tried to do something different or work away from it, but I didn't necessarily want to go back and use it because I thought this is Walter's library of work. It stands so much on its own. I have to find my own voice on the character. And the funny thing is, Walter is a huge influence on me, and his storytelling and the way he approached comics and being a writer-artist himself. I love him as an individual. I love him as an artist. I love him as a writer. And so I think his run on Thor was just tremendous. But the worst thing you can do, I think, as a writer is to then step onto a book after that person and try and do something like what they did. Because if they did it perfectly, there's no reason to try, right? I mean, because you're not going to be perfect yourself. And so I think what you want to do is live up to the standard that they set, but you have to do it through your own voice.
Yeah, because if you try to just emulate his voice, it's never going to be your book, really. It's going to be trying to emulate the book wouldn't have a voice. And again, the readers would notice in, what, 5 seconds?
Right, yes.
Why would you follow a book by Dan Jurgens that doesn't feel like Dan Jurgens?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, Agustin. Okay, this is a weird one. Agustin Jimenez Enriquez says, "Greetings, Mr. Jurgens. Hope you're enjoying this meeting. I have a question about copyright laws. You see, in the following months, I will going to send a story to Image Comics, but I don't know if I need to do some paperwork because I'm not American. I'm from Mexico."
Without knowing the details and without knowing exactly how Image operates, I would always say this: do the paperwork and protect yourself, because that's always what it comes down to. And protect your ideas, protect your concepts, do whatever it takes. And it can be hard to do because it costs money. But ultimately, you are investing in yourself.
Yes.
And that always pays off.
Let me say it this way, Agustin. Doesn't matter if you're from Mexico, from Spain, Italy, or anything. Was exactly what Dan just said. Protect yourself first, copyright your story, and then you go and send it. Protect first, because you never know what's going to happen. It probably couldn't be any problems, but as Dan said, protect yourself and then go and send it. This is the only way to feel safe about it.
Yeah, we've all heard stories. And often the stories are just misunderstandings and weird things that happen. I'll often have someone come up to me and said, "Oh, the Batman office, I sent them an idea 4 years ago about Commissioner Gordon stopped smoking and then he starts again." And it's like, well, yeah, that's pretty obvious. And so if you see them publish it, they didn't steal it from you. It's like their own writers thought of it, but always protect yourself.
Yeah, and also there's reason they don't accept open submissions, because there's always going to be that guy who says he created the idea of Commissioner Gordon quitting smoking, or that everybody at Marvel suddenly stopped smoking. That was my idea. Like, I'm sorry, God, no, stop.
Right.
Anyway, in your opinion, Angel Perez says, in your opinion, what was wrong, if you think it was wrong, with Superman in New 52 until the point that DC needed to kill him in return with the Clark and Lois and bring back the Clark and Lois from pre-Flashpoint DC?
Well, I think that here's the thing, and it's very hard to tell the marketplace that Superman and Lois are not married, because every comic we had been reading for the previous how many years, they were married. We saw them get married on TV. We saw them have that relationship established. And on top of that, the two characters that debuted in Action Comics #1 in 1938 were Superman and Lois Lane.
Yeah.
So she goes all the way back to that. And what happened in New 52, by breaking so many things up that way, that, Batman was still pretty much intact. Green Lantern was pretty much intact. But what we lacked was context. We didn't know how all of this fit together. And it's not just telling the story of the first Justice League meeting. Even when I was working on Green Arrow, for example, I asked the question, okay, as we start Green Arrow in New 52, have Hal and Ollie been on a road trip together, which is really Green Arrow and Green Lantern's most famous story.
Yep.
Hard traveling heroes. Has that happened? I was told yes. Then by the time we were 3 issues into it, I was told no, they hadn't. Well, that sort of changes things. And the whole problem is the entire market recognized that story. You've reprinted it time and time again. We've all seen it. We've all known it. And I think what the New 52 became, a lot of it worked, but the parts of it that didn't is because we sort of lost context.
Yes.
How everything fit together. And it doesn't mean we couldn't have had perhaps a book where Superman and Lois weren't necessarily married, but we didn't. But once you take that apart, then what else comes apart, right? And what about the Kents? Where were they? Were they alive? Everything was sort of, it just didn't connect. And we don't have to be slaves to continuity. I don't say that at all. But we have to understand what works, and we have to understand the connections among our characters in our universes.
Yeah, it's like I remember when I was told by an editor, because one of my guys was on the book, oh, Tim Drake was never Robin. Like, wait, what was it? No, he was, for 2 months, he had never been Robin, and suddenly he became Red Robin, and then 2 months later, he had been Robin, but not Red Robin, and then they changed the shoot, and then you said Dick Grayson never looked like we've seen him look for 40 years, and all that, and I was like, what? But where's the explanation? Where's the context, all of this? And this, I want it to be, I'm only asking for you guys to be consistent.
Yes.
And I think that the problem with New 52 is that it stopped being consistent really fast, right?
Right. And I think that's what really hurt. And so, for example, when I was doing Green Arrow, I drew this sequence where Green Arrow and Black Canary are on a rooftop together. And we had written it, and I had drawn it, and George Perez inked it, and it was beautiful. And then they said, well, wait a minute. We've decided that they have not yet even met. I said, oh, really? So we scrapped the artwork and had to go back. And the problem is, when we're confused as writers, guess who's confused when they buy the books?
There you go.
And that's kind of what happened. And it's too bad. I think we could have done a better job on it so that a lot of the New 52 stuff would have still stuck in place. But part of it is we see Justice League, the first coming together of the heroes, which was beautifully done. But then some of our books, we were 5 years into it. And we didn't know, okay, if Superman has been Superman for 5 years, what else has happened? What has not happened? But Batman is this and Robin is that. And we weren't, the glue wasn't there. And we don't need to be slaves to continuity, but we do have to have the glue.
Yeah, the consistency, the what you just said, exactly. Agustin says, by the way, I reread your Superman, Lois and Clark is my favorite John Kent story. Thank you. Gonzalo Araya says, Mr. Jurgens, now that comics are read in more diverse countries, is the translation to other languages considered in the writing progress, or is it always created only for the main market?
Typically, it's only considered for the main market. That having been said, we try and leave room for it. We have had discussions, I'm sure you've been part of this, where it comes up as to how it will play someplace else. And so, for example, not too long ago, I toured through Germany and did signings at a bunch of different places there. And they were explaining to me how much they like, this is when we were doing Rebirth. And they liked the Rebirth stuff because we were coming out twice a month with Action and Superman, and it fit their publishing format very, very well for them in the way they put the books together. And that was a good thing for us to know, because then that's something we could contemplate, going forward. And I still think with Rebirth, I love that twice a month format because it allowed us to keep the stories fresh and alive. Sometimes you'll pick up a comic and read it and you realize, gee, it's been a month since I read that and I don't even remember. Oh yeah, that's right. Now I remember. But when weekly is almost too frequent, but bi-weekly, yeah, that really worked. As a writer, I could keep momentum going on a story, and I really like
that. That reminds me of, as you just said, thinking for the market. Some years ago, I convinced Paul Levitz in a meeting, to do a book that was Batman in Barcelona. That was night. So I had, I was the non-official editor of the book, and I was talking to Mark Waid, who was writing it, and he sent me the script, and the script was, Killer Croc, who was the bad guy, blah blah blah. Before he started doing anything, the cops see him and start shooting, and I had to say, you have to change that. And he was like, why? Because if a cop does that in Spain, he goes to jail. He cannot holster, he cannot shoot. He has to be, something has to happen, has to be, Killer Croc has to attack or something like that. And he was like, oh, because Mark was telling me, for us, and it's like, no, you cannot do that in Spain. You just go to jail. You have to wait, you have to insert a panel there where Killer Croc attacks, maims, whatever, hurts one of the cops, and then they react and holster and shoot. If you don't that, if read by somebody here, it's never going to be realistic. Sometimes it's just subtle details like that, right?
Sure, that's good to know. Yes, that's a great example.
Okay, so let me see. Chris North asks, what do you think about Bendis run as Superman writer?
I thought Brian was so when the changeover happened. Brian and Bob Harris and Dan DiDio and I went to lunch one day. And Brian was just explaining to me what he wanted to do. And I think Brian was true to the vision that he wanted to paint for the character. And I think that's what's so important, that when you're a writer and you go on a book, if you have a vision for what you want that to be, are you true to that impression and that conviction that you have for that character? And I think Brian absolutely was. And he talked about wanting an older John Kent and why he did and how that was going to work and everything. And so I think, I think it's just fine. I think it's great that Brian as a writer was doing what he thought was going to be his vision of Superman. And not thought, he did his vision of Superman. And that's all but any of us try and do. And I thought it was very good. And it was different than mine, and it was supposed to be different than mine, right? And that goes back to what I said earlier. You don't want a book to continue what the previous guy did. If you are a writer, you go on there to do something different. And that's what Brian did. It was very credible. And I salute him and give him a tip of the hat as he comes to the end of his run.
Pablo Cabo Garcia asks, what's the best tips you have to become a writer in American comics?
Say that again.
He asked, what's the best tips you can give to become a writer in American comics?
Well, one thing
aside of keep writing.
Well, the other one is what I always say is read a lot that isn't comics, and I think it's so important to expose yourself to other styles of writing, and read a lot of different authors, read different genres, and then make that part of who you are as a writer. And more than anything, if I'm sitting at a convention, when we had conventions, people who wanted to be writers would come up to me and say, I have this great idea for a story. They turned Batman into a robot, right? Whatever. It's always this plot thing. And what I almost never hear is something that is built on character. And, it's always, Batman crashes the Batmobile, so he's got a new helicopter and the helicopter crashes. It's like, well, that's okay. I always hear adventure, but it's got to be character. And to me, that's the first thing. In an environment where, Batman and Superman have been published for 80 plus years.
Mm-hmm.
What is it that is different? Make it different for me. Tell me what the character part is. And I think that in terms of a tip, read a lot of different stuff, different genres, and really think about character and not just the fight. And for artists, it's the same way. You talked about this earlier. An artist will come up to me and show me a portfolio and a splash page after splash page. And it's all Wolverine, right? And it's always Wolverine jumping at me with the claws. It's like, okay, great. I have seen that 5,000 times and you're number 5,001. Show me 8 pages of continuity.
Yes.
And don't make it here are the first 2 pages penciled and inked. Oh, here's page 3 and 4 just penciled. And here's 5 and 6 broken down. And then a couple of blank pages with the panel boxes drawn in. It's like, dude.
Yeah, I always say the same thing with artists. That I see, oh, you like this artist, like how many times have you looked out the window in the last 4 months? Like, why? Because this tree is not the real tree.
Yep.
This tree you copied from another comic, and this you copied from another comic. Like, just fucking look at real life and tell a story. You have to interpret real life. If you don't understand real life, you can't become a comic artist. You just can't. You cannot tell a story if people is not going to believe what you just drew there is a real tree.
Yeah. And the other one is that I see a lot. They might draw, even in continuity, a reasonably decent Spider-Man, say. But as he's swinging through the city, all the buildings look like shoe boxes, and because they're somewhat out of proportion or they don't have enough windows. And you just see what I see more than anything now is, and a lot of this is because they're working digitally, is people on the backgrounds. And I always say, don't even use the word background with me, because that diminishes it. It's an environment. And I see so much cheating on that now. And it's just like, I see more and more, that's someone else I don't want to work with. So that doesn't do you any good, dude.
Absolutely. It's the same thing with the buildings. Every time they show me these cardboard boxes, as I just said, I always go back to who lives there. Like, what? Who lives there? That building, you know what, is eroded by rain, by storms, by the weather, by the pollution, whatever. Where's the blinds on those windows? Where's the lights? Why there's no light in there or there's light in the other? It's gotta look like somebody lives there.
Yeah.
And you guys don't draw buildings where people live. You just draw boxes. So if I look at that, there's something that is always repeated with artists and with creators in general. It's like humans live out of pattern recognition.
Yeah.
If you give them the blinds, if you give the lights, if you give that erosion on the building, automatically our brain is going to interpret somebody's going to live there. So it's going to take you into the story.
Right. The one I always look for is when I start to see the buildings, if they take the time to draw, to figure out that you're looking at a building, and let's say it's an apartment building and it's 6 stories tall, and that every third set of windows has a balcony on it, then I know they've really thought about it. And when you take the time to first plan it and then draw those balconies, it's like, okay, now we can talk.
Yes.
Right. Exactly. Now we can have a conversation about whether or not you've hit the mark, but at least the attempt is there.
Yeah, the attempt, and they go the extra mile to tell you a story with significance that tries to get you there. It's like the angle. I always talk about the angle with establishing shots. Like, there's angles for a reason. You want to take the eye to some part of your reason as a storyteller is to be a manipulator. You want to take the eye to some place. So it's just, oh, that's establishing shot. Yes, but how did you take my eye there? Where do I go from there? Why don't you have a close-up from the establishing shot? You get me to a close-up in the same page, so you have to move the camera. It's about telling stories. Is also knowing how to get the reader to go where you want him to go, right?
Right. Yeah, very true.
Okay, so let me see. What do you think about Francisco Sanchez? What do you think about Superman, Zack Snyder's vision of Superman?
You mean across the couple of movies that he did, I assume? I thought it was very credible. I think Henry Cavill makes an outstanding Superman. I think he could be brighter. That would be my only comment. But if that's part of where the character goes, if that's part of the character arc, I think that's something that can get done. I'm certainly looking forward to the so-called Snyder Cut and what he's going to be doing in the future, because I think what we were seeing is, so in a way, the Marvel movies to me all seem to rely on a formula, right? And it's a very effective one. And it's one that as a viewer is a lot of fun to watch. And I think what Snyder was trying to do is tell a deeper story than that. So I'm very interested in seeing what his vision is, because he's more of an auteur at that point. And I want to see what that vision is for those characters and how he wants to express his ideas in terms of where he wants to go.
Okay. We are close to the 2-hour mark and you have a life to go to. So let me just ask one last question and I'll let you go and enjoy life again. What is the thing that you think you haven't done in comics yet, and you say, I'm not going, if you ever think about retiring, which I don't think you're able to mentally think that you ever retire, but put yourself in a situation that it's yourself that I haven't done yet. What do you think it would be?
I think the trick to me is to try and find a way to create stories that move people. And I wouldn't say that that's something I haven't done yet, but I think that is always the goal. And whether it is with a Superman or a Booster Gold or a different hero or a creator-owned thing, I think the trick is always to try and move people somehow. That it can be through the something that happens within those pages. And so what I try and pretend sometimes that I haven't done that kind of thing, because then you increase the challenge for yourself, which I think is important to do. It should never be relying on success of the past or anything else. It's what do I have to say? Because as the world changes, I think that's part of how you find a way to move someone. That it's how does the world change? How do the characters change along with it? Whether they're long-standing ones or brand new ones, that affects how you tell a story that moves someone. So I twisted your question a little bit, but that's my answer.
Okay, I'll take it. It's fine.
Fair enough.
Okay, so thank you so much for being here, Dan. First of all, I hope you enjoyed it, which is the most important part.
Yes, this was great.
And to all of you, thank you so much for being here. Daytime, nighttime, whatever it is for you. Tomorrow with us, mañana con nosotros, Santiago García y Tony Giral. Dan, please don't cut, because I want to say proper goodbye to you.
Okay.
After I cut the feed. And to all of you, let me know if any of you was able to decipher the t-shirt, just for fun.
I did.
Care. Yeah, I know you did. You're the clever guy in the room. Don't worry about that. See you all tomorrow. Thank you so much. We are